And that's why Julie Andrews whistles and everything. Oh, hello! Welcome to Show People, the podcast that shines a spotlight on the UK performing arts industry, covering the latest news, industry issues, what to see and do, and showcasing theatrical talent, whilst always trying to inform, educate, and entertain. Hello to all our listeners around the world. My name is Andrew Keates. I'm a director and your host. Now, today's guest has appeared in musicals such as Falsettos, Elegies for Angels, Punks and Raging Queens, The Last Session and Rent. They've travelled the world and are responsible for affecting our entire industry, and I think it's safe to say there isn't a person on this planet who hasn't heard about them. Please scream, shout, tell all your friends about HIV! Well, I bet you weren't expecting that. Some listeners will know I'm HIV positive. I'm not ashamed of it. It's something that's in my life, and today is World AIDS Day. Now, I don't have AIDS, but this is the one day a year where everybody is supposed to be aware of HIV and AIDS. But for me, World AIDS Day or HIV Awareness Day is every day. Every day I pop a pill in my mouth, and that keeps me alive. And every day I get asked the same questions, and I give the same answers. And it's been very apparent that there are lots of questions that people have that they only ask when they're given the opportunity to talk to somebody with this virus. This episode, I'm going to talk about how HIV entered my life, the questions I get asked, and how it affects this business. It's World AIDS Day, and you're listening to the Show People podcast.
Hello, my dears. You have the ineffable and probably undeserved pleasure of listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keates. This is Stephen Fry wishing you a wonderful listen. Thank you.
Loyal listeners will know that I usually start off our interviews by saying, let's start at the very beginning. And I think that's a really good idea when it comes to HIV. Often I find people asking me things like, is it true that HIV started because some bloke fucked a monkey? Other ones are, I heard it was like some conspiracy theory because the US government wanted to like control all the gays in New York and they invented this virus and it just got out of hand. Unlikely. Where did HIV come from? Scientists identified a type of chimpanzee in West Africa as the source of HIV infection in humans. They believe that the chimpanzee version of the immunodeficiency virus, called simian immunodeficiency virus, or SIV, you try saying that when you're pissed, most likely was transmitted to humans and mutated into HIV when humans hunted these chimpanzees for meat and came into contact with the infected blood. Over decades, the virus slowly spread across Africa and later into other parts of the world. The earliest known case of infection with HIV-1 in a human was detected in a blood sample collected in 1959 from a man in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Genetic analysis of this blood sample suggested that HIV-1 may have stemmed from a single virus in the late 1940s. We know that the virus has existed in the United States since at least the mid to late 1970s. From approximately 1979 to 1981, rare types of pneumonia and cancer and other illnesses were being reported by doctors in Los Angeles and New York among a number of male patients who had sex with other men. These were conditions not usually found in people with a healthy immune system.
Scientists at the National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta today released the results of a study which shows that the lifestyle of some male homosexuals has triggered an epidemic of a rare form of cancer. Robert Bazell now in
1982, Terry Higgins is one of the first people in the UK to die of AIDS, and the Terence Higgins Trust is founded. AIDS is reported in several European countries, including the UK. The name AIDS is created and used, and community organisations in the UK promote safer sex among gay men. In 1983, AIDS is reported among non-drug using women and children. Experts become more confident that the cause of AIDS is infectious. In 1984, gay men are asked to stop donating blood. Western scientists become aware that AIDS is widespread in parts of Africa. The number of people diagnosed with AIDS in the UK exceeds 100. and scientists identify the virus, which will later be known as HIV, as the cause of AIDS. In 1985, the UK government commits millions of pounds to fight against AIDS. The first AIDS screening test for use on all donated blood intended for transfusion is approved. The first international AIDS conference is held in Atlanta, USA, and HIV testing is introduced in the UK. In 1986, HIV is adopted as a name of the virus which causes AIDS. The UK government launches its Don't Die of AIDS campaign.
There is now a danger that has become a threat to us all. It is a deadly disease and there is no known cure. The virus can be passed during sexual intercourse.
This host is born. The UK government's Don't Die of Ignorance campaign is launched, with leaflets to every home in the country. The BBC and ITV screen simultaneous broadcasts of a public information film entitled AIDS, The Facts. AZT, or AZT, is the first drug approved to treat HIV. It reduces the death rate of HIV-positive people, but it is unpredictable and causes severe side effects.
That was a public information film.
Her Royal Highness Princess Diana opens the first HIV ward in a UK hospital. She is photographed holding the hand of a patient with AIDS. It went on to be regarded as a pivotal moment around the world and still remains an iconic image today.
Her wasted hand reached out for help and support. She had been abandoned by her family, seen by them as an unbearable embarrassment and disgrace.
The number of people diagnosed with AIDS in the UK exceeds 1,000. 1988. World AIDS Day is established on the 1st of December as the first International Health Day. A World Summit on AIDS is held in London, resulting in the London Declaration on AIDS Prevention. 1989, the first HIV awareness materials targeting gay men are produced by the Health Education Authority. 1991, the red ribbon becomes the international symbol of HIV awareness. The BBC soap opera EastEnders runs a story in which Mark Fowler, a major character, is found to be HIV positive, raising awareness of the condition.
I've got, I'm not ill or anything. Not yet.
Ill? Well, why should you be ill?
I'm what they call HIV.
Freddie Mercury, the lead singer of rock group Queen, confirms rumours he has AIDS and dies the following day at the age of 45. 1994. AZT is shown to reduce the risk of mother-to-child transmission of HIV. Derek Jarman, a film director, artist and writer, dies of AIDS.
Now, Derek Jarman is dead, and our lives are the poorer for it. He was remarkable, both for what he did, painting, writing, gardening.
A new class of HIV drugs are made available, paving the way for effective treatment in the future. The joint United Nations programme on AIDS is established, and Kenny Everett, a comedian and broadcaster, dies.
And suddenly, there's a clap of thunder, my spacesuit falls off and I'm weightless, and I'm starting to float away, and it takes 10 men to hold me down. Believe me, Michael, that's when you really find out who your real friends are. And I'm telling you the plot. Anyway, it's all done in the best possible taste.
1996. The International AIDS Vaccine Initiative, a non-profit organisation based in New York City, is set up to speed up the search for an HIV vaccine. New drug combinations are shown to halt the progression of AIDS, heralding the beginning of highly active antiretroviral therapy, which will become known as ART, and transforming the lives of many people living with HIV. Antiretroviral post-exposure prophylaxis, PEP, is recommended for healthcare workers exposed to HIV through accidentally being stuck by a needle. 1997. Deaths among people living with HIV fall dramatically following wider introduction of ART. Around 22 million people are living with HIV worldwide, according to estimates made later. Trials for an HIV vaccine begin. 1999. The government announces plans to offer all pregnant women an HIV test as part of routine screening. The number of new HIV diagnoses among heterosexuals exceeds those among gay and bisexual men for the first time. 2002. The Global Fund is established to boost the response to HIV, TB and malaria worldwide. 2003. The NAT launches Are You HIV Prejudiced? A campaign bringing attention to the stigma and discrimination still faced by people living with HIV. The first English conviction for the transmission of HIV takes place, but is later appealed. HIV drugs become more affordable for developing countries. Results of the first major HIV vaccine trial show promise, but are later shown to be ineffective. 2005. Antiretroviral post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP, is recommended for people exposed to HIV from rapes, accidents, or occasional unsafe sex or drug use. After 2 years of appeals and retrials, a man is given a prison sentence under English law for reckless HIV transmission. Royal assent is given to the Disability Discrimination Act, giving legal protection against discrimination for people living with HIV from the point of diagnosis. 2006. The number of people living with HIV in the UK is estimated at 73,000. 2007. A case is reported of a San Franciscan man with leukemia and HIV being cured of HIV after a bone marrow transplant in Germany. UK Coalition of People Living with HIV closes. The Terence Higgins Trust marks its 25th year. Around 33 million people are living with HIV, according to revised estimates. Another major HIV vaccine trial is halted after preliminary results show no benefit. 2008. A controversial Swiss study claims people adhering to ART have a negligibly small risk of transmitting HIV through unprotected sex, a concept which is later known as treatment as prevention. 2009, President Obama announces the removal of the travel ban that prevents HIV-positive people entering the US.
If we want to be the global leader in combating HIV AIDS, we need to act like it. And that's why on Monday, my administration will publish a final rule that eliminates the travel ban, effective just after the new year. It's a step that will encourage people to get tested and get treatment. It's a step that will keep families together, and it's a step that will save lives.
Results from an IPREX trial show a reduction of HIV acquisition among men who have sex with men taking PrEP. 2011. HIV treatment as prevention is hailed as the biggest scientific breakthrough of the year by Science magazine, as a major trial shows 96% reduction of HIV transmission risk during heterosexual sex without a condom when a person is successfully responding to treatment. 2015. The first home HIV testing kits become available after being legalised in April of 2014. Results announced of a PROUD study testing the effectiveness of PrEP on reducing HIV infections in 544 participants. Rihanna and Prince Harry, son of Princess Diana, both take HIV tests together in Barbados to highlight World AIDS Day. Rihanna says the test was so easy, and Prince Harry said, "We are all sexual beings." It is also normalising testing. It is the responsible, cool thing to do to know your status.
As people with HIV live longer, AIDS is a topic that has drifted from the headlines. And with that drift of attention, we risk a real drift of funding and of action to beat the virus. We cannot lose a sense of urgency, because despite all the progress we have made, HIV remains among the most pressing and urgent of global challenges. 1.1 million people died of AIDS, and 2.1 million were infected last year alone. HIV remains the #1 cause of death amongst adolescents in sub-Saharan Africa.
2017. In August, it is announced that PrEP, which can prevent HIV, would become available to at least 10,000 people in the UK whose partners may be HIV positive through sexual health clinics. Public Health England figures show there has been a significant decline in new diagnoses of HIV in the UK in gay and bisexual men. The CDC officially admits people with HIV who are undetectable cannot transmit HIV. It is just impossible for me to cover everything that happened over those extraordinary years. I've missed out heroes and I've missed out monsters. I've missed out battles and I've missed out celebrations. But thank you to everybody who fought for us and helped us. And now let's concentrate on talking about what we can do today.
Hello, this is Kim Ismay, and you're listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keates, and I hope you're having a wickedly interesting time.
So let's begin with one of the rudest questions I get, which is, who gave it to you? There's a very interesting thing. People seem to think that HIV positive people are going out and infecting people with intent. Well, that's not true. I understand why people think that. The reason being is it points a finger. It's very easy to look at someone with an AIDS ribbon or someone that you know is HIV positive and say, oh, be careful of him. He's got HIV. Indeed, that's happened to me. That happened from a friend of mine who saw I was kissing a guy on a dance floor when I was single. And my friend went up to him, told this guy that I was HIV positive. The guy left. And my friend said, you've got to stop doing that. I said, what do you mean stop doing that? I'm allowed to kiss whoever I want. He said, you're HIV positive, Andrew. You've got to be safe now. Now, you might think that was wise advice. My friend might have just saved that guy's future from HIV. No, not at all. I am HIV positive, but I'm something called undetectable. And what that means is I take medication, which means the viral load, as in the amount of HIV that's in my body, down to such a level that I'm A, no longer able to pass the virus on, and B, it won't develop into AIDS. That's incredible. But I think the reason people say, be careful of him, be careful of her, she's got HIV or whatever, is it's pointing a finger in a direction which is away from themselves. We like to feel like we're in control, but also we like a little bit of ignorance. So if we've never had a test, if we don't know our status, well then always pay attention to those that make the most AIDS jokes, the ones who point at people in bars and make fun, because so many jokes come from our insecurities. And it's a lot easier. It's a very comforting thing to think we can identify somebody who is HIV positive. Indeed, some of the symptoms for being recently infected with HIV are no symptoms whatsoever. Many friends, or friends now that I've met since going on this journey, were couples. They'd finally got together, finally settled down, and then for whatever reason, years later, one of them or both of them fell very, very ill. And they'd never been tested. They thought that they had got to that point in their life where they were in a relationship and yes, they'd got away with not contracting HIV and now they could live happily ever after. But it was too late. HIV was already in their system, or it was already in one of their systems. It had been passed on, and then the consequences had occurred. Now, that does often mean that no one is going to die, but why wouldn't you want to know your status? I think people are frightened of it. Which leads me to my next question. How did you find out? How did I find out? Well, I was doing a play called As Is by William M. Hoffman, the most extraordinary experience I've had. I did it both at the Finborough Theatre and then later at the Trafalgar Studios. When I was doing it at the Finborough, I had a pact, basically, with the cast and the production team, which was everybody who was doing this production should get tested by the end of the production. It was a lovely little thing we did. And as we continued on this extraordinary journey of doing this incredible play about a couple, one has AIDS, the other does not, and how the lead character interacts with the world around him, how he deals with his partner, how he deals with his death sentence, and the vital importance of love and humour. And that play did extremely well. It's probably one of the best things I've ever done. And the show had come down, and that weekend, or I think the following weekend, we had at Arion Productions a barbecue just to thank the cast and the creatives and production team and everybody involved at my co-producer Andrew Harmer's house. So it got to the day of the barbecue, and I realised, fuck, I haven't had my test. I'm such a hypocrite. So I went down to a sexual health clinic in Southwark because it was the only clinic that was open that day and at that time. So I got down there very, very early in the morning, and I just remember being in the this enormous queue going in. Some people were very clearly in their clothes from the night before. Some people have very clearly not slept. I remember there was this extraordinary smell of vodka Red Bull. And I was in the queue, all smartly done up in a nice suit. And as the queue piled into this sexual health clinic, I sat and I waited, drank really shit coffee, and eventually I was called in. And I went in, and my first thought when I met this male nurse was, bloody hell, you look like Paul Hollywood. So that was distracting me a little bit. And we were chatting away. And then he basically asked me to sit in this, like a barber's chair. Looked a little bit like the same chair Sweeney Todd had in some respects. And I sat there and we were laughing and joking, and I still think we were flirting a little bit, but anyway. He got out what I can only describe as a contact lens pot, is what it looked like. And all he needed to do was prick my finger and put a tiny bit of blood into this pot. Then all I remember is him going deathly silent. And to break the silence, I just said, "It's not positive, is it?" And he put this enormous hand on my right shoulder and he said, "It is, mate. We're going to look after you." From that moment, I don't really have a great memory because, of course, I was in shock. I remember being led down different corridors, talking to different doctors. And I do remember I was talking to one doctor and I said, I mean, is it possible that if I've caught it quite soon that we can undo this? And she was very matter of fact. And she said, no. Once you're HIV positive, you won't be HIV negative again. And I said, but I keep hearing these amazing things in the news, you know, and all these new treatments that are coming out. Can we at least try something? And she went, no, you are HIV positive. I then remember I was being herded to various rooms, filling out various bits of paperwork, and just landing outside the doors again with a piece of paper and a referral form to St. Thomas's Hospital. And the sun was so bright. And I was sort of vomited onto the streets of London, an HIV positive man. And the fear that I had wasn't necessarily of the virus. I wasn't thinking that I was going to die. I knew that wasn't the case. But I knew what my friends and my family and colleagues said and joked about people with AIDS and HIV. I knew what people really thought of people with HIV. I knew how people thought they were dirty and unclean and reprobates and perverts, and I knew what my own gay community thought of people with HIV. So my first thought was to contact recent partners, which I did, literally there and then on my phone. One of them, an actor, put the phone down on me and still hasn't spoken to me to this day. And another was so self-obsessed, decided to send lots of abuse. Anyway, I ended up realizing, I had the barbecue to go to. So in my state of shock, I jumped on a train and then a cab and ended up outside my extraordinary friend Andrew Harmer's house. And I remember I arrived at the door and he was hoovering. Keeps a very, very wonderful house, does Andrew Harmer. And I knocked on the door and he obviously couldn't hear me. Then after a while, he finally opened. And I said, darling, can I talk to you? And he said, well, I've just got to finish the hoovering. And he was preparing all this wonderful food. And I said, I really need to talk to you. So we went upstairs. And the first time I ever said I'm HIV positive was in front of him. Properly, out loud, to a person. I'd spoken to people on the phone, but I mean, I was in such shock then, but the realization and saying it, looking into another person's eyes, was Andrew Harmer's. And he just said, "I'm sorry," and gave me a big hug. Anyway, the cast and production team arrived, all smiling and proud of what we had done. I didn't say anything. And then one of my cast said to me, "Andrew, do you think people got tested because we did this play and found out they were positive?" And all I could say to her was, "I know they did." What followed over those few weeks was an amazing awareness of how my life was different. I would still go out with friends, but they would make AIDS and HIV jokes, particularly when we would go to gay clubs or gay bars. And God, they stang. One of my particular friends, who will remain nameless, who does know now, everybody knows now, but one of the first friends, one of my closest friends, we were out having a few drinks, and a very, very tall, thin guy walked past. And I was trying to pluck up the courage to tell him, "Darling, I'm HIV positive." And he just went, "Oh, she's probably got AIDS." How could I tell him that night? For the rest of the evening, I just thought, I will never be given respect or given the same freedoms that I had before. So after a lot of thought, I went to a very, very dear friend of mine, Paul Gambaccini, who is the same radio broadcaster that many of you will know. Paul was friends with Freddie Mercury, indeed Elton John, Kenny Everett. He had been so useful during various productions. He's been a voiceover for me in a Jewish Scottish punk rock musical. And indeed, during As Is, he came in and spoke very, very eloquently about his amazing involvement with the likes of the Terence Higgins Trust, his friends like Kenny and Freddie, as I just mentioned, and his amazing campaigning and fundraising. And I went to Paul's incredible flat, and I sat on a sofa opposite him, and I said, "I just need a grown-up to talk to." He said, "What is it?" And I said, "I'm HIV positive." And Paul said to me, one of the best things any human being has ever said to me. He said, "Andrew, you are the luckiest man in London." Now, I'll tell you this, I didn't feel like the luckiest man in London. And he said, "You're the luckiest man in London because of when you were born. You're not going to die. You're going to live a long and happy life." And then I looked in those beautiful eyes of Paul Gambaccini's and I thought, I know how many of your friends you've seen die, both in New York and in London. And I've got a virus. That's it. I've got a hell of a lot of stigma ahead of me, but ultimately it's just a virus.
Hi, this is Annette Badland, and you're listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keates.
So later, I finally got an appointment at the clinic I had to go to at St. Thomas's Hospital called the Harrison Wing. So I arrived, and I remember sitting in this waiting room that was packed. And in there, there was a screaming baby in the arms of its mother. There was the most beautiful blonde guy in a grey suit who was stunning. There were some old queens, there were some young queens, there were various men and women all over the place. And I had this desperate need just to stand up and say, "Don't worry everyone, I'm the one with the HIV." Because I just looked around and thought, well, I know that's what I usually thought when I went to the sexual health clinic. Have I got HIV? Have they got HIV? You start assessing people. It's almost like a twisted audition where nobody speaks. And eventually I was called in to this little waiting room, and this beautiful Brazilian nurse said to me, "How are you feeling?" And I was angry. I was angry at myself. I was angry at the world. I had so many things in my head. And I said, I just wanted to stand up in that room and tell everybody I'm HIV positive, just so they could all relax. And he went, "Darling, what are you talking about? Everybody in that room is HIV positive." And my first thought was, fuck, I should have given that guy in a grey suit my number. And then my second thought was an amazing sense of not being alone. Such a wide, diverse group of people, all absolutely normal looking, some gorgeous, some horrendous, some funny, some not. All of these different people in that room had exactly the same thing as me, and they were okay. And he said to me, next time you get on the tube, just know, any tube you get on in London, someone is HIV positive with you. You're everywhere.
Hello, this is Steve First, and you are listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keates. A man so marvellous, he's putting bums on seats. Whether it be parakeets eating halal meats or premier athletes submitting VAT receipts. It's the Show People podcast with Andrew Keates.
Another question I get, or a statement I get, is, Andrew, you're an intelligent guy. You know about condoms and things. Why are you in this situation? Well, the answer is, I think it was depression. When I was at drama school, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but when I was at drama school, my nan passed away. And not instantly, over about a year. She had cancer of the brain. My nan was dying, and I was going back to Bournemouth every weekend to see her and to care for her. And on top of that, I had a partner who wasn't out, and I was his first partner. And as my nan was dying, I ended up suffering from immense depression. I attempted suicide twice. I had a very, very poor mental health. I was very, very cruel to this person at drama school. And I was very mentally unstable, is the truth of the matter. And then eventually, I lost my drama school as well. And I had terrible, terrible, terrible depression. And I think I held on to that depression and that grief for several years. And when you do think so little of yourself, if you really don't care about yourself, if you really think you're as terrible a person as I did, then why the hell are you going to care if someone wears a condom? The grief I had after the death of my nan and the end of, well, frankly, the first man that I was ever truly in love with seemed odd. And the reason I mention it, obviously that was quite some time before being diagnosed with HIV, is my very, very dear friend suggested I get some counselling to find out why. Why on earth was I putting myself at risk by having condomless sex? I mean, I knew I preferred sex without a condom because, and I don't think this will shock anybody, I don't know many men that do obsess about wearing a condom. It feels better without. And we've got to stop punishing people by saying, wear a condom, that's the only option. No, there are other options. So I was talking to this counsellor, this amazing, amazing man who, I won't say who he is, but he was very instrumental in the early days of gay rights. Indeed, he was a member of the Gay Sweatshop, which is a fantastic theatre company. Was a fantastic theatre company. And it was only when he told me this thing about Freud, and I'm going to mention it here because I wonder how many other people have encountered things. He asked me who my mother and who my father was. I said my mother was Kim, and I don't know who my real dad is. I was the most expensive mistake of my mother's life. But I did have a stepfather who I hated, and his name was Dave. And he said, okay, but who was your mother figure and who was your father figure? And I said, well, as I said, my mum was Kim, my dad was Dave. And he said, that's not what I asked. He said, Freud has this belief that the mother figure is the person who looks after you, cuddles you, treats you, tells you you're wonderful. And the father figure is the authoritarian. He's the person who, lays down the rules, scolds you, sets an example, really, makes sure that you know what to do and how to do it, etc. And in that moment, my entire life changed, or my entire perception of my life changed. Because I realised my nan was my mother figure, and my mother was my father figure. And when I was howling into the moon and attempting suicide and all these various things, and telling people my nan's died. And no one bar a couple of people cared at drama school. Nobody cared. What I was really saying to them was, my mum's died. And I realised that my depression stemmed from that moment. Now, this counselling really helped me, and something that he said to me, because I was considering just being open about my HIV status. And this counsellor said to me, Andrew, it's the genie in the bottle effect. Once you tell people, it's out. It's never going back in. And that scared me a bit. And the more I thought about it, I thought back on my entire life. I thought back of when I was being bullied and beaten in my shitty school in Dorset. I thought of all the people that had told me things that I couldn't do. And never once in my life had I ever been ashamed of anything that I was or had done. It didn't feel right not to be open and own this part of my life. So many of my heroes had died of AIDS or written about HIV and AIDS. I thought of the great gay rights campaigns and heroes that I'd read about and watched films about, people like Harvey Milk to Oscar Wilde. It seemed wrong that this pesky virus was such a source of hatred and stigma when I don't think I'd done anything wrong. I worked with an organisation called the Make a Difference Trust. You might know them for producing things like West End Bears and West End Eurovision. And the chairman at the time was a wonderful man called David Pendlebury. And I used to help them get various celebrities and contacts and favours and whatever. And I asked David to come and meet me at the Century Club on Shaftesbury Avenue because I had something that I wanted to give him. So David said, "Oh, what is it?" And I said, No, let's meet. And David met me. We sat in front of each other and I said, "David, I'm HIV positive." And he said, "All right, how are you holding up?" Really normal, really sort of typical person that works in these services, not pandering to it, just going, how are you getting on? And I said, "I want to give you the most precious thing that I have at the moment. And that's my secret." And he said, "How?" And I said, "I would like to go on stage at West End Eurovision," which I was helping them with, at the Dominion Theatre, which obviously at the time had the extraordinary statue of Freddie Mercury atop of the theatre. We Will Rock You was playing there. And I said, "I want to tell the audience that I'm HIV positive, but you must film it. And we can share this video throughout the industry. Because people know me. People know my face. People know my name. Let's humanize HIV." So the night arrived, and I stood in the wings, absolutely terrified. In fact, David was waiting there for me just in case at the last moment I bottled it. And I stood in the same place that Anton Deck usually stood during Britain's Got Talent. So think of me next time you watch that show. And I think it was Mamma Mia or something that were on stage. The theatre was packed. I took a deep breath, and I heard this.
Mr. Andrew Keates. My word, this is bigger than the Finborough. Gosh. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't somewhere where I usually belong as a theatre director, but tonight I thought I'd make an exception. Or the Landor. My name is Andrew Keates, and I'm probably best known as a theatre director. And my job is essentially to look after those that work in this wonderful business that we call show. And in many ways, that's the reason why I wanted to speak to you tonight. Last year, I had the privilege of directing the very first AIDS play, As Is, by William M. Hoffman. And I was amazed that so many people turned to me and asked, "Why are you doing an AIDS play in this day and age? Surely we're beyond that." I sat down with my cast and my production team on the very first day, and I said, there's a few reasons why I want to do this. Firstly, because it's a beautiful story, the idea of one person reaching out to another and saying, "Will you take me as is?" As anybody knows in this room, I'm a little bit of a romantic. The second part of why I wanted to tell this story was because of the respect that I have for all those that we lost in the 80s and the 90s. Those of you who have been Those of you who have been in this industry more than a couple of minutes knows that with the return of Miss Saigon, just how many we lost in that great cast 30 years ago. And the most important reason, and the reason that I wanted to do this play, was that perhaps if one person saw our little play in a little room, maybe they may get tested. And perhaps that if it came out that they were positive, they would get the therapy that they needed. The thing that shocked me and the thing that terrified me is after the production, I had no reason that that person would be me. I had never thought that I would ever be HIV positive. We're not raising money just for some people that are outside of the theatre. We're raising money for our friends and our colleagues and all of those that work in this wonderful business. And you know what? It's hard enough. Why do we have to have some kind of prejudice about it? Before this speech, I was probably some opinionated guy on Twitter. Now you see me as somebody with this horrific virus. I said at the beginning of this speech, if I have one wish tonight, it is to look after all of you in some respects and to tell a great story. Well, I couldn't have given you a bigger story. Bless you. Bless you. But, last but by no means least, as a director's job, it is to look after one's cast and one's production team. And with that in mind, regardless of the great fun that we're having tonight, I beg every single one of you to get tested. Now! Be safe. And last but by no means least, my darling, if you actually were lucky enough to audition, you would know that the last actor I paid got £470 a week. I think you should take that back. And if you think that that's more important than why we came together, then my love, I have deep sympathy, and perhaps you shouldn't be here. Because as far as I'm concerned, we're all artists. And actually telling great stories is why we come together. And I've shared mine with you, like it or lump it, but actually I care. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Matthew Keates, ladies and gentlemen. How f***ing brave was that?
Well, that didn't go quite as I expected. I won't lie. It was deeply hurtful and frightening to walk out on that enormous stage and hear a few boos, and then to be heckled frightened me, and it made me angry. But I wouldn't hide away from anything I've done in my life. Yes, I was certainly guilty in my earlier days of doing profit share productions, but if that actor, and I do know who he is, and I'm certainly not going to, even to this day, give him the satisfaction of even uttering his name in this. But yes, I had done profit share productions, but always with the intent of doing great work and supporting actors, and to stand on stage in front of so many people to share something so personal with still the same intention. To be somebody with HIV, to inspire everybody else to get tested. Since that moment, I've sat with, it must be thousands of people by now. Many, many people currently at drama school, terrified, absolutely terrified, because they've recently been diagnosed with HIV. Actors who lived through the 80s and the 90s and still suffer extraordinary survivor's guilt. Some people, one particular mother comes to mind who I see quite frequently, who has a son who is HIV positive. I expected work to become less. I expected people to treat me differently. But what was amazing was the outpouring of love that happened the next day via social media and news outlets all covering theatre director comes out HIV positive. And I'm very, very proud that I did. And anybody who's listening to this that follows me because of doing this, then I say to you, you don't have to come out that you're HIV positive. But if you do, you might be able to help normalise things.
Hi, this is David Bedella, and you're listening to the Show People podcast with Andrew Keates.
One of the first things I found myself depressed about, even though there was all these lovely things people were saying about me, was I sort of assumed in my naivety that I should really give up on love. Who would want an HIV positive partner? Who would really want to bring that back to meet the parents? And one night I met an amazing chap who one night invited me back to his. And as we went back in the cab, I said to him, there's something you need to know. He didn't work in the business. There's something you need to know. And he said, what's that? And I said, I'm HIV positive. And it's okay. I can go home now. Because before we had met, I had gone on date after date after date. And you know what? The third, fourth date, all marvellous, all talking about how much we loved Hello Dolly and how Sunday in the Park with George was a triumph. And then he said, oh, by the way, I'm HIV positive. And then the text stopped. Or a reason for not seeing me was given. And so I'm in the cab with this guy. As I'm HIV positive. It's okay, I can go. And he said, I'm a nurse. I said, I know. And he said, so I know you're no risk. He said, you're undetectable, right? And I said, yes. He said, well, get up those stairs then. That man is called James Perry, and he is my fiancé, and he has an engagement ring on, which, if you take the engagement ring off and read an inscription, it says, I'll take you as is, which is a line from the play, As Is. Don't give up on love. Again, if you meet somebody who is HIV positive, you can have a long, happy, non-risk relationship. Don't discount someone because they're HIV, because of all the films you've seen from the 1980s. Love, love, love. And there's many reasons not to like someone, but having HIV is simply not one of them. So now, as we draw to an end, I've got a bit of a problem. It would seem I've got a successful career, not going to die, I'm in love and in a relationship, even got a wonderful podcast. Why should we worry about HIV? Why? Well, other than just the stigma that I've spoken about, the last thing I want to tell you about is the side effects of medication when you're first put on the antiretroviral drugs that I'm on today. So after my time at St. Thomas's, I was put on a drug called Atripla. Atripla is an amazing early drug. It was sort of the holy grail when it came to antiretroviral treatment because it reduced the virus and made it stop dying. It had relatively low side effects. But that wasn't the case for everybody. When I started taking Atripla, I must have lost 2 stone. I would have hallucinations, night terrors. I collapsed in the shower so frequently. Every morning I'd wake up to a soaked bed, soaked in my own sweat. It made me irritable. It made me so angry. It was like coming down off Class A drugs in the morning is the only way to describe it. Like drinking too much coffee almost. My bowels were a state. I could never be warm. And I put up with it for about, I think, 6 months. And then I went to the doctors and I walked in and I looked like a ghost, really. And my doctor said, you look terrible. What's wrong? And I said, it's the medication. She said, well, why didn't you get in touch? We could have put you on something else. And I, in my naivety, said, I didn't know there was anything else. I then went on to another drug, which for another 3 months was hellish. And another drug, and that was hellish. And eventually, I arrived at the right drug for me, but that was about a year. A year of not really being able to work, of being unhappy, not being able to go out, feeling uncomfortable in my own body. And on top of that, there is no reason for us to believe that I will do anything else other than have a long and happy and healthy life. But of course, all of this medication has no history yet. It's all new. Earlier in the podcast, you heard us talking about AZT, which, appeared to be great in the 80s, but it was a failed chemotherapy drug. And indeed, there were some people whose lives were brought to an end early because of it, because of how damaging it was to the immune system. We don't know what these drugs are going to do to us or do to me in 20, 30, 40 years. Indeed, with the current political state, we don't even know what's going to happen to the NHS. At the moment, I get all of my drugs for free. Who knows what will happen to me if the current government ends up privatising the NHS? It's vital we protect it. My future, I believe to be certain, but what is? I'm going to bring the episode to a close now. There's a few things I want you to do. Check out tht.org.uk, the Terence Higgins Trust. It's an amazing website and an extraordinary charity, and all of the resources that they have there for you to either raise funds for them, find out about your status, find out about statistics, find out about how you can get involved as a volunteer, whatever. Check them out. They're an extraordinary charity. Stop the jokes. Stop the finger pointing. The next time you hear somebody make an HIV or an AIDS joke, just be aware there's a good chance that somebody who is HIV positive is sat amongst you and too frightened to talk about it because of the stigma that exists. I want you to find out your local sexual health clinic and get tested. We all need to know our status. I'm going to repeat what I said in that speech, because I still mean it. I beg every single one of you to get tested now.